This should be absolutely no surprise by now, but my Warhammer ADHD has struck again. The new Blood Angels releases kind of inspired me to want to give painting a Blood Angel a go, since I'd never actually painted a Blood Angel in all the years that I've been painting Warhammer. I kind of wanted to use this as a test for creating a new to me red scheme, since red has always been a color that I've actually traditionally really struggled with getting a result that I'm happy with. So I picked out one of my currently unpainted Assault Marines from the same box that I actually painted one of my Magenta Marines in, and I was extremely happy with the result, to the point where I think I'm actually just going to do an Assault Marine, Blood Angel and Death Company standalone army, which is a problem because I already have a Marine army on the go. So yeah, that is kind of what it is at this point. I've also converted up a cool Blood Angel Captain because I'm really not happy with the characters that they've released. So I'm going to be doing another follow-up video on painting and converting that guy. But for now, as I usually like to go with painting Warhammer, I more or less winged it. I had an idea that I wanted to do this with inks because I wanted it to be very vibrant and punchy, but quick to achieve and relatively easy to achieve as well. So I used a purple base coat just because it's kind of in a similar tone to the red, but obviously darker and colder, so it would be a better shadow tone for the ink, which is quite transparent. And I then used my airbrush to zenithal highlight with white ink. Now I'm using Liquitex titanium white ink. It is, to me, by far the best white ink that I've ever used. It's not necessarily as opaque as other white inks, so you do have to kind of be careful and do a few passes, but going top to bottom, this is how it looks. I then used an ink that I've had for a long time, but I've never actually used it, and that is my Liquitex red ink. So same brand, same pot, very opaque coverage for an ink, which was surprising to me. I actually ended up having to go in and kind of just re-establish some of those shadows. The zenithal highlight shadows do still show through quite well, but I wanted the contrast across the panels to be a little bit more obvious and striking, especially considering these guys are going to be matte varnished, so the effect of light over it isn't going to play as much of a big part. But I just carefully went over in a couple of passes with that to get full coverage, and then I went with one of my favorite inks, which is my Vallejo Violet ink, and just from underneath kind of did a reverse zenithal highlight, and then picked out and targeted some areas like the bottom corners of the shoulder pauldrons and that kind of thing. Again, a couple of layers just to build up a darker purple undertone. Then, since this was the test guy for an army project, I wanted it to be quick to achieve a very good kind of tabletop result. So I opted for an oil wash for all of the panel lining. So off camera, I've already gloss varnished the model, and for that I've used my Liquitex high gloss varnish through an airbrush. While letting that dry, I'm just mixing up an oil wash with Abtooling 502 Black and Abtooling 502 Fast Dry Thinner. If you want some more info on oils, I do have another video on the channel, but basically the gloss varnish just makes the surface slippery. It reduces surface tension, and using capillary action, I've heard that term a ton of times and I just haven't Googled it. I don't know what it means, but it basically, in practice, means that the oil does not have like a surface to grab onto. So you can see as soon as I just touch the brush into a little crevice, it just spreads rapidly through all of the little cracks, but doesn't actually bleed out onto the flat surfaces. This is kind of the perfect technique for these kind of models. All of the panel lining on this model, which, you know, before using oil paints would have been an absolute nightmare to do, this took roughly 5 minutes to get a virtually perfect result. And the beauty of oils is, one, they take a long time to dry, but two, you can kind of reactivate them. So the oil's dried at this point for the most part, and just using a little makeup sponge with a small amount of that same Abtooling 502 thinner soaking it, I'm able to just go over the model and just sponge or brush off any oil that's in an undesirable place and clean it up again. Since the model was already gloss varnished, I went over it with some transfers because, again, it's easier to put them over a glossy surface, and it's also kind of, it matches up with the glossy transfer paper. So when you matte varnish it over the top of that, it looks a lot more uniform. These were old transfers that I had lying around, and I didn't get a perfect result over the shoulder pauldrons. There was a little bit of raised portions there. You can see it's kind of like a little bit white, but basically I just put some microsol over the areas, placed the transfers down and waited about 15 minutes, then put micro set, which is a solvent that just softens up the transfer itself, and just kind of let that soak in and then press them into place. I then matte varnished the model and blacked out all of the details, and now using Vallejo Game Color Stonewall Gray gradually blended into some Pro Acryl Black, I'm just adding some warm gray highlights into both the chest, eagle, and the shoulders. I do have to apologize for the kind of back and forth quality of the filming. Having moved and having a different camera setup, it's at a different angle, which I think overall is better, but it means I'm just kind of getting used to keeping the model in focus again. So the clips here look great, whereas some of the other clips have looked a little bit average, just me holding it in the wrong spot. But I've kind of gone out and bought everything I can to actually have my camera set up mirrored on my computer screen in front of me, so I can be a little bit more proactive about actually seeing what I'm filming while I'm painting and keeping it in focus, which should hopefully help. I do have to mention that all those kind of little improvements are possible because of my patrons. I do have a Patreon. I don't push it super hard because I haven't been quite as consistent with content and whatnot. But I am working on some projects for those guys. I want to do some big projects for the channel, like the Warhound Titan that I'm actually slowly working on at the moment, that will be given away to a Patreon supporter eventually. So if you're keen on that kind of thing, or just helping me out in being able to make this content, go check that out. It'll be in the description. While I was painting that, I kind of ummed and ahed over how I wanted to do the sword, and I landed on kind of the more old school style Blood Angel scheme. I figured this red was so vibrant and punchy, having a Hazard chevron chainsword would really fit it. So I masked off most of the model with blue tack just so as I could get away with airbrushing the sword, and went over it with Liquitex white ink, basically because it's an easy way to just put smooth white over any surface. And then using some Scale 75 Inktense yellow ink, I went over that, and that only took a couple of coats to make a fully opaque result. I didn't have much of this left, so I wasn't actually able to shade it as much as I wanted to, but I just put a couple of thin layers of cyan and yellow onto one side just to give a little bit of shading. I then unmasked the model and didn't do the next steps straight away, purely because I wanted to let those inks set and dry for quite a while before doing any more masking on them. So I went and used Vallejo Metal Color gunmetal and just base coated all of the metallic parts of the model. I then painted all of the ribbed undersuit just with some cold grays. So I used some of the colder grays from Vallejo's Game Color range and just using the edge of my brush went over the raised surfaces and in a couple of passes brought them from kind of a mid-tone to a light gray right in the middle. Nothing crazy, I think it was only like 2 or 3 layers, but just brings out those little details there. I think I did it off camera, but I used some of the same oil from the pin washing on the red armor and actually put that over all of the gunmetal gray. And now I'm just using some Vallejo Model Air Chrome and just kind of with an old crappy brush, just doing some scratchy, I want to say highlights, but kind of just a layer over the top of the raised portions. And this is how he's looking so far. I took this kind of in case I wanted to use it for Instagram or just to take stock of the model and how it's looking so far, since this was a test and I'm not sure if this is 100% the scheme that I want to go with, but I'm thinking he looks pretty good. I decided to bust out this little notched cutting tray thing that I bought randomly from a hobby store that I hadn't had much of an opportunity to use. And I was able to cut out some perfectly shaped strips of painter's tape, and this is to create the chevrons on the chainsword. I then just used my Vallejo black primer through the airbrush. I use specifically primer because it's just thicker, so it's less likely to pull up and spread out and kind of run underneath the tape when I'm airbrushing it on. And there you go, easy peasy hazard chevrons. I think it came out pretty cool. I definitely do want to shade the yellow a little bit more on the next ones, but also maybe not, because it is very vibrant and punchy and just reminds me of that old Games Workshop style. So I'm not sure, what do you guys think? I then just gave the plasma pistol a very quick dry brush with some cold gray, and then using the same Liquitex titanium white ink, created a bit of a glowy halo around the plasma coil. Then using some of the white ink just taken straight out of the airbrush, but on a regular brush this time, I filled in the interior of those plasma coils just to really give it a bright, opaque layer of white. I kind of struggled with what color I wanted to do the plasma glow. I settled on green, and I'm not necessarily sold on it, but I used some Vallejo Fluoro green on the coil and just built up the color over a few thin layers. Then using Liquitex titanium white ink again through a brush, I just traced the outer edges of the coil. And then using the edge of my brush and a dark green, I think I used Games Workshop Caliban green, I kind of used it to highlight the top of the coil. So it's like the interior of the plasma coil is bright, and then it cools off as it gets to the exterior. I then just had some boring bits to paint left, like the little straps. I forgot to paint the eyes, but basically I painted them with some white ink, some fluoro paint over the top of that, and then a little bit of white ink again over the top of that with a brush, and then did the base and then called him done. So for a tabletop kind of level gaming worthy piece that can kind of plug into an entire army of these guys, I think I'm really happy with this scheme. People on my Instagram seem to really love this shade of red, and I agree with them. I'm extremely happy with this red, which is good because red is something that I've, as I mentioned before, always really hated painting because I was never happy with the result. The only issue that this guy brings me is I want to do an entire army of them. So I think I'm gonna repaint the magenta marine, assault marine that I have, as well as the other 3 from that box. I've already started painting up that captain that I've converted that I showed before, and I'll be making a video on that. And I don't know, maybe I'll convert some Sanguinary Guard because I'm not happy about the fact that they don't have wings anymore. Do some Death Company and just, I don't know, have some fun with it and make a really goofy Assault Marine army. And then I'll be able to document that on the channel. But yeah, if you like this video, do all the YouTube things. You guys know what to do. Like it, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Other than that, I will see you guys in the next one.